Hey, Larken Rose here, and someone asked if I could do a video in response to this, or asked if I already had a response to this, because it's something that voluntarists hear a lot. And in fact, lots of people hear it a lot. Like if you complain about any injustice in the U.S., there's a pretty good chance you're going to hear somebody say this. Now, this is a direct quote. I'm not going to give the names because the point isn't to make fun of this particular person, because 80 gazillion people say things like this. So, somebody I know who's voluntarist was, pointing out injustice and stuff that happens in this country. So this person says, "You are obviously not an American. If you are, and this country is so bad, you should consider moving to a utopian country you think is better. It seems you would be happier, and I'm certain all true Americans would be too." So, you already see the ridiculous, and there's plenty of analogies people can use. It's like if you're in somebody's car and you go, "Hey, nice car, but like I think your right rear tire is low on air." Ugh, if you're going to criticize my car, then just get out. I love this car. This car is awesome. I pledge allegiance to my car. Like, if there's something wrong with a car or a ruling class or a place or something, the idea that pointing that out is in any way bad or somehow makes you ungrateful. How dare you condemn like actually bad things? And it's not by accident, it's absolutely trained into people. Now, it just so happens that I just did a Mr. Smith Explains episode with Amanda reading a little passage from the Jones Plantation novel. And something that comes right after the part she read is very relevant to that kind of response. When you point out things about what's happening in the United States that's just horrible, well, what place is better? What plantation would you rather be on? So here is Smith explaining how you mentally enslave people, because that's the movie and the novel has a whole lot of his words of wisdom on how to enslave human livestock. So he says, quote, "The goal of an adept slavesmith is not just begrudging compliance from his subjects. It is to be praised and adored by those whose wealth and power he takes for his own, to be revered and worshipped by those he enslaves. When trained properly, a slave's loyalty to his master becomes a deeply held faith which he pushes on to others, and even passes on to his own offspring. The ultimate success for any slavesmith is to achieve a situation where the slaves themselves enforce obedience on each other, rebuking any who would dare to question or disobey the master." And that is a perfect description of what that particular person was trained to be. A mindlessly loyal subject of an authoritarian parasitical ruling class of the country known as the United States of America. And notice that people who have been trained into like patriotism and nationalism, they're not clear in their own heads what it is they love or what it is they're supporting. Because, as I've explained before, a country literally means the territorial jurisdiction of a national ruling class. That's what the word means. So when people, well, it's because freedom and greatness, and no, it's a jurisdiction. You love an authoritarian jurisdiction that is claimed by a certain ruling class. That is what a country is. The lines around the country, when you step over the line, morality didn't change, right and wrong didn't change. The only thing that changed, the defining factor of what makes a country, is that the ruling class that claims the right to rule that other piece of dirt that you just stepped on is a different one from the ruling class that claims the right to own and control the piece of dirt you just stepped off of. That is what the word country means. Now, in the indoctrination into statism and nationalism and patriotism, that is muddled intentionally, and you can see how well it works. By people who wave the American flag, and they don't know what it represents. They have some vague thing about because we're great and freedom and stuff. It's like, this is nowhere near a free country. There isn't such a thing as a free country, because country means the jurisdiction of a ruling class. If you're free, there isn't a ruling class there. It's not even the freest country, like economically or socially or any way you measure it. But if you point that out to true Americans, like that guy said, meaning indoctrinated subjects of a ruling class, they'll get mad at you and blame you and tell you to go somewhere else. Notice that this isn't the master saying, hey, you're bad-mouthing me, get off my plantation. It's a fellow slave saying, you're bad-mouthing the master. Well, if you don't like it, go find some other plantation to be on. And the fact that that is mostly what continues the cycle of patriotism and nationalism, devotion to a particular ruling class, which they would never describe it that way. But the fact that it is so effective that the human livestock are the ones pushing this on each other, and then they push it on their kids, and then they wave the flag around, and if you ask them, what does that flag represent? America! Okay, what's America represent? Freedom, and we're great, and we're awesome, and we're better than everybody else. It's like, okay, no, it isn't freedom, not even close, not in any way, shape, or form. It's literally infinitely less free than it was as a colony under a king. So no, there is no foundation at all to pretend that America has anything at all to do with freedom. Now, the human livestock on this particular piece of dirt like to imagine themselves to be pro-freedom while they put up with 8 gazillion restrictions and taxes and infringements on their individual liberty on a daily basis, constantly, but they want to believe they're free. Now, I could go on and on about that, or you could watch the Jones Plantation and pay particular attention at the end to a few things that Mr. Jones has to say about that. But the fact that basically telling people that you wish they were more free, you wish they weren't being abused by political parasites. I mean, you're also wishing it for yourself, but like voluntarists and anarchists don't just advocate that I want to be free and the rest of you should be enslaved. Like, it's a principle. It's a philosophy. Nobody should be enslaved. And so it really is like telling slaves on one slave telling another slave on a plantation, we shouldn't be anybody's slaves, and the other slave getting angry. Like, how dare you say bad things about the master? Now, does that sound outlandish and impossible? Because that happened, like in real life, on actual slave plantations. Because the level of indoctrination and conditioning that they went through when they were raised like cattle would indeed, and if you don't have to believe me, go read the works of Frederick Douglass, who grew up as a slave. It worked on a bunch of people who thought they were supposed to be slaves. They thought they were the rightful property of the master, and that if you, fellow slave, tries to run away, you're the bad guy in their eyes. In the eyes of other slaves, you're the bad guy because you're stealing yourself from the master. Now, I have to throw in this qualifier every time. I am not at all comparing the level of suffering and injustice that the average American goes through now to the level of suffering and injustice that like a chattel slave went through. Obviously, we have a zillion times easier life. We are a zillion times more free than slaves, like outright open slaves. That doesn't change the fact that the principle is the same. And the propaganda methods are the same. And here you have one example of gazillions that I've seen, you've probably seen it yourself, an example of the victim of a ruling class who gets robbed at every turn, controlled at every turn, limited, regulated, bossed around at every turn by a ruling class. And when somebody says, this isn't okay, this isn't freedom, what do most victims of authoritarianism do? Well, watch the Jones Plantation and find out. But that's what we're up against. And the people didn't choose to do that. Nobody ever is nationalistic or patriotic by default. They have to be trained to be that, like a dog, literally. Now, people can naturally have an attachment to their family and maybe their community if they know a bunch of people. They can like certain places. Like there's a bunch of cool areas in the US that, like, the landscape in the wilderness is really cool. Loyalty to a country only ever exists when it's indoctrinated into somebody. Because why the hell would I have loyalty to this gigantic area, the vast majority of which I've never been to and never seen? And this is coming from somebody who's been to 48 of the states, because I used to go out west when I was a kid, because my dad was a teacher. I've seen a lot of it. Still haven't nearly seen most of it. Haven't nearly met more than a fraction of 1% of the people. Why the hell would I feel a loyalty to it? Oh, and I'm also supposed to feel a loyalty to Hawaii and Alaska, which I've never been to. And like, why am I loyal to them too? Am I not loyal to, like, Canada in between? No, I'm loyal to this dirt and that dirt, but not that dirt. That's a different dirt. The only difference is the ruling class that claims the right to rule. That's what a country is. And when people are emotionally manipulated into feeling loyalty and emotional affection, and this is the thing, I remember that. I remember getting emotional at the patriotic fervor and it's just training dogs. And I was one, and the training worked on me. I loved America. I proudly said the Pledge of Allegiance. If you had asked me what America was, I'd have no stinking idea. Well, it's this country. Okay? Why is it how do you love a country? Do you love the dirt? All the people? Some of the people suck. Some of the people are awesome, but some of the people outside that line are also awesome. What is that devotion to? What is it you're loving? If it's freedom, holy crap, do not wave the flag of the United States government. That institution is 100% anti-freedom in every possible way. It doesn't give a crap about anybody's freedom. It is an authoritarian, parasitical ruling class. And if you don't want to hear that, and you get offended because somebody is pointing out that your abuser is bad, what does that say about your mentality? What does that say about the indoctrination that you've been through and how effective it's been at getting you to advocate your own victimization, to the point where when somebody points it out, you get mad at them instead of mad at the people abusing you? And by the way, this is why I refer to it as battered citizen syndrome, because it is very similar psychologically to if there's some guy who's an abusive, manipulative, narcissistic, violent piece of crap who beats up his wife. In a lot of cases, and it's the saddest thing, in a lot of cases, the wife won't leave because she's scared of the unknown. And if somebody bashes the husband, she'll defend him and make excuses for him. That is the length to which the manipulation and the abuse, the psychological abuse, basically creates a trauma bond. And it's kind of like a trauma bond when people have been robbed their entire life by a ruling class and still feel loyalty to that flag and to the republic for which it stands. The flag stands for the republic. A republic is a ruling class. It is a government. And the fact that they do certain rituals and let you play games and pretend you have some say in the matter when you don't at all in any way, shape, or form doesn't change the fact that you are pledging allegiance to a bunch of parasitical crooks. And if they can successfully make it so muddled in your head that you feel an emotional attachment and loyalty to people who abuse, rob, and dominate you, then you are their propagandist. You're going to go bash anybody who says this isn't right. I shouldn't get robbed like this, and neither should you. And if you get mad at somebody saying that, if you get mad at somebody pointing out the evil of your abuser, back up. Look in a mirror and figure out you're not just a victim, you're an enabler. You're making excuses for the worst people in the world because you're determined to believe in your own head that the plantation you're on is better than any other plantation. And by the way, Frederick Douglass explained that too. That slaves, chattel slaves on actual slave plantations, would come to feel a loyalty to the plantation they were on, so that they would get defensive and angry if anybody said, oh, this master in this plantation over here is better. And they would literally fight and argue and insist, no, I'm the slave of the best master on the best plantation. If, like the person whose comment I just read, your goal is to be a slave on the best plantation with the best master, that's really sad. That is really, really sad. If your goal is freedom and justice, you have to stop falling for the crap that teaches you to feel an emotional loyalty to people who abuse and subjugate you and everybody around you. And I know, having been patriotic before without ever having thought about what the hell that even means, it's a hard pill to swallow for flag-waving, patriotic, nationalistic types to realize you're cheering against freedom, not for it. You're cheering against your own freedom. You're cheering against justice, and you're attacking anybody who doesn't and calling them a traitor. A traitor to what? Your benign master that we should be so grateful to? Ew. If you wave the flag and believe in freedom, you're arguing with yourself. You're inconsistent with your own belief system. You have to pick one. Because the flag that represents a ruling class and the jurisdiction, the territorial jurisdiction of that ruling class, known as a country, you can either love that or you can love freedom. Those are opposites. Despite the indoctrination most of us were put through, to love your country and be patriotic is the opposite of loving freedom. That's just how it is. And I know a lot of people do not want to see that. They do not want to admit that because it's comfortable to stay in the thing that you were trained to believe and feel the way you were trained to feel. I suggest thinking until you're the one who decides how you feel, instead of letting the master decide for you how you should feel about being his slave.